I stood at the church pulpit with a stack of old letters in my hands. My heart was racing so fast I could hear it in my ears, but my voice stayed steady. I looked right at my father standing beside the pastor and said, "When my father stood here today and told everyone my mother was his only sweetheart, I felt something break inside me, because last week I found the letters he wrote to another woman, and I found the birth announcement of their daughter." Gasps moved across the room. My mother sat in the front pew, frozen in shock. My father's face went tight and angry. Everyone waited for my next words. Before I opened the first letter, I took a deep breath and reminded myself why I was doing this. I wasn't doing it out of revenge. I was doing it because the truth had been hidden for nearly 40 years, and the person hurt the most by those lies was sitting right in front of me. If you're ready to hear what I found, stay with me, because this story changed my family forever. My name is Riley Hartman. I grew up in a strict Southern church where your reputation mattered more than anything. My father, Deacon Paul Hartman, was treated like a hero. He was the man people went to for advice, prayer, and approval. He was the man everyone trusted. At home, he was controlled, distant, and difficult to read. He demanded respect, but rarely offered warmth. My mother, Jenna, was the opposite. She was soft, gentle, and patient. She took care of everyone before she took care of herself. People loved her because she had a quiet strength that made you feel safe. She supported my father through everything. She believed in loyalty, forgiveness, and honesty. She always told me, "Truth keeps a family strong." For years, I didn't understand why our home felt heavy, even when nothing was wrong. I didn't understand why my father barely spoke to us, or why he acted lighter and more relaxed around people outside our home. I thought it was normal. I thought some fathers were simply like that. When my father had a small heart scare a few weeks ago, I went to my parents' house to help clean the attic and organize old boxes. He asked me to bring down his old work briefcase. It was dusty and had a broken latch. When I picked it up, the lock popped open as if it had been waiting years to be opened. Inside were old files, a silver pen with his initials, faded photographs, and a stack of letters tied with a red ribbon. The paper was yellowed, the ink fading, but the handwriting was clear. The dates read 1986, 1987, 1988, 1989. Every letter was addressed to MD. I didn't understand who that was at first. I thought maybe it was a coworker or an old friend. But when I unfolded the first page and read the opening lines, my breath caught in my throat. The letters were filled with words my father had never said to my mother. They were tender, emotional, and full of promises he never kept. One line read, "Our daughter deserves better than hiding." Another said, "I will tell Jenna. I just need time." I sank onto the floor. The letters spread around me. My hands were shaking. My chest felt tight. For the first time in my life, I realized the distance I felt from my father was not about me. It came from a secret he had carried long before I was even born. The discovery was only the beginning. I had no idea that these letters would lead to a truth deeper and darker than anything I ever expected to find. And I had no idea how much pain my mother had been living with, without even knowing the reason. If you're following this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. I appreciate every single one of you. The letters stayed on my kitchen table for 2 days before I could read them again. Every time I walked past them, my stomach tightened, and my heart felt heavy. I kept hearing my mother's voice in my head, telling me that truth keeps a family strong. And I kept thinking about how my father had spent his entire life preaching about honesty and faithfulness to the people at church. I had grown up believing that my parents' marriage was built on loyalty and commitment. Finding those letters felt like discovering a trapdoor under my childhood, one that opened into a world I never knew existed. As I sat at the table rereading each letter, I realized this wasn't some short fling or one-time mistake. These were years of emotional connection and private moments he had never shared with us. The letters spoke about concerts they attended together, late-night drives, small gifts he brought her, and long talks about the future. He described her laugh, her kindness, the way she helped him through stressful days at work. He wrote to her in a way I had never heard him speak to my mother. The more I read, the clearer it became that this relationship had been real and deep and hidden carefully for decades. And it hadn't ended cleanly. It ended with a baby. Seeing the birth announcement broke something open inside me that I didn't even know was there. It wasn't just that he had cheated on my mother. It was that he had created another family in the shadows and walked away from that responsibility while pretending to be a moral leader. The announcement wasn't fancy. It was printed on plain cream paper with the baby's name, weight, and birth date. At the bottom, in handwriting I recognized instantly, were the initials PH. My father had signed the birth certificate of another daughter without telling a single soul. While he was telling my mother he was at Bible study meetings and church retreats, he was building a different life on the side. But as painful as the letters were, they were not the only pieces to the story. Once I knew the truth, old memories came back to me like flashing lights. Memories I had ignored or pushed down because I wanted to protect my mother or convince myself that I was overthinking things. When I was 22, I remembered walking past his home office late one night. When I came home from a friend's house, I heard a voice that didn't belong to anyone in our family. A young woman, maybe in her 20s, was giggling through the speaker, and my father was laughing with her. It wasn't the way he ever laughed at home. It was softer, flirtier, almost youthful. I froze at the doorway, and before I could step back, I heard my father say, "You make me feel young again. I'll see you after your shift. Keep it quiet." At the time, I convinced myself it had to be a misunderstanding. Maybe he was joking. Maybe he was talking about something innocent. I wanted to believe that so badly. A few months later, I saw another sign. I was doing laundry for my mother and found a restaurant receipt in my father's blazer pocket. It was for a very expensive steakhouse in a different town. The date on it matched a night he told my mother he was at a late meeting with church staff. That already made me uneasy, but when I flipped the receipt over, I saw a handwritten message that said, "Thanks for last night. You surprised me. T." I remember feeling my stomach drop. I kept staring at the note until the letters blurred. I hid it in my dresser drawer for weeks, unsure of what to do. Eventually, I threw it away because I couldn't bring myself to break my mother's heart without solid proof. I hated myself for that later. About a year after that, a coworker named Nora casually mentioned seeing my father at the mall, walking with a younger woman who looked like she might have been around my age. She told me the woman had her hand on his arm and they looked close. I laughed it off and told her she must have seen someone else, but deep down, I knew she had no reason to lie. I asked him that night if he had been at the mall, and he snapped a harsh no before I could even finish the question. He didn't even look at me when he said it. He shut the conversation down so fast it scared me. That was when the uncomfortable truth started forming in my mind. But I buried it because I didn't have proof, and I didn't want to destroy my family based on suspicion. All those old signs came flooding back when I saw the letters. Suddenly, everything made sense. My father's cold, distant behavior at home, his sudden mood swings, his obsession with controlling the family image, his long church meetings that always seemed to happen at night, his anger when anyone questioned him, all of it was part of a life he had been hiding. I gathered the letters and decided I needed to confront him. I found him in the kitchen drinking tea and reading the paper like nothing in the world was wrong. I put the letters on the counter and said, "I want you to tell me who Marissa Doyle is." He froze. The color drained from his face, and his eyes darted to the briefcase on the table. He didn't ask how I found the letters. He didn't ask what I read. Instead, he grabbed the stack as if I was stealing something from him. He said, "Where did you get these?" "Riley, those are from a long time ago. They don't matter anymore. You have no business going through them, and you will not tell your mother. Do you understand me?" I felt something inside me crack. I told him that these letters were part of our family's truth, and that my mother had a right to know. His voice rose. "You will not bring this up again. That is the end of it." He walked away without looking back, but it was not the end of anything. It was the beginning of everything. After my confrontation with my father, I went home feeling shaken, angry, and strangely empty. My hands were still trembling from how quickly he shut me down. I could barely wrap my mind around the fact that a man who preached honesty every Sunday had looked me in the eye and told me that the truth did not matter anymore. He acted like the past could be erased as long as he refused to acknowledge it. I kept hearing his words replaying in my head. "Do not tell your mother. That is the end of it." For him, the conversation was over, but for me, It had only just begun. When I walked into my kitchen and saw the letters still spread across the table, something inside me shifted. I realized that I had spent my entire life avoiding conflict to keep the peace at home. I had always been told to respect my father and not question him. I had been told that marriage was private and that loyalty meant protecting the family image. But looking at those letters, I understood that silence was the real poison. My mother had built her entire life on trust and partnership. She had given my father her youth, her support, and her loyalty. She had kept their home running while he built his reputation. She deserved the truth, even if it hurt, especially because it hurt. That night, I read every letter again carefully, from start to finish. I read the early ones where my father thanked Marissa for helping him through stressful weeks. I read the ones where he described how much he looked forward to seeing her after work. I read the ones where he told her he wished he had met her before marrying my mother. My throat tightened at that line. I read the letter where he talked about the night they spent together in a small hotel after a work conference. I read the letter where he apologized for missing the first ultrasound. And finally, I read the birth announcement again. It was still so simple, almost painfully ordinary, except that it carried the deepest betrayal my mother could ever imagine. After I finished reading, I felt another memory rise in my mind. When I was 14, my mother had asked my father why he never wanted another child. She had said she wished I had a sibling. He told her he was too busy and too tired, and that one child was enough. I remembered the defeated look on my mother's face. She accepted his answer without questioning it. Now I understood why. He already had another child. He had made that decision for our family long before I was born, and he never gave my mother the chance to know what truly shaped his choices. I knew I needed to do more than confront him. I needed answers. I needed closure. I needed to understand what happened to Marissa and what happened to the child. I grabbed my laptop and started searching for any information I could find. It took a while because the letters were so old and some of the names were common, but eventually, I found a matching name with an obituary. My chest tightened as I read that Marissa had passed away 5 years ago from an illness. The obituary mentioned she was survived by her daughter, Lillian Doyle, who was listed as living in another state. I stared at the name for a long time, knowing she was alive, knowing she was out there living her life without ever knowing she had a sister, filled me with a strange combination of sadness and curiosity. I wondered what she knew about her father. I wondered if she had ever asked about him. I wondered if she had grown up believing he abandoned her, or if she had been told a different story. I wondered if she even knew his name. Finding Lillian made the situation heavier, but clearer. My father had not only betrayed my mother, he had betrayed this girl too. He had left her with a shadow instead of a father. He had chosen convenience over responsibility. He had pretended that the past never existed, even though it shaped the future of 2 families. That night, I sat at my table well past midnight, thinking about what to do next. My mind kept returning to my mother. She had done everything right. She had loved my father without conditions. She had supported him through every church event. She had stood beside him proudly for nearly 40 years. She deserved the truth more than anyone, but telling her would break her heart, and the idea of causing her that kind of pain made me sick. Then I remembered something she told me when I was younger. She said, "Keeping secrets for someone else's comfort is not love. It is fear disguised as loyalty." I had not understood it at the time, but now it felt like she had been preparing me for this moment without knowing it. The next morning, the church began final rehearsals for Deacon Appreciation Sunday. People were buzzing with excitement. They were practicing speeches about my father's leadership and devotion. They were hanging banners with his picture. My mother was decorating the front table with flowers and silver ribbons. She looked so happy and proud. Watching her place each ribbon carefully, not knowing what was hidden behind his smile, broke me in a different way. I knew I could not let her walk into that ceremony believing a lie. My father stood at the front of the room, smiling at the committee and practicing his speech. I heard him say, "Jenna has been my only sweetheart since high school." He looked right at me when he said it, like he was sending me a warning. That was the moment I made my decision. His lies were no longer just private sins. They were being celebrated publicly by people who had no idea what he had done. I left the church and went home. I gathered all the letters, placed them in a folder, and sat with them for a long time. I thought about what might happen. I thought about the fallout. I thought about the pain that would come. But I also thought about healing. I thought about truth. And I thought about how lies never die unless someone brings them to the surface. That evening, my Uncle Mark stopped by unexpectedly. He saw the stress in my face and asked what was going on. I didn't tell him everything, but I did tell him that I had learned something that might break our family apart. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Truth does not break families, lies do." Hearing that from someone who had always treated me with kindness gave me the final strength I needed. I decided that I would speak at the ceremony. I would read the letters. I would bring the truth into the open, not to destroy my mother, but to free her from a lie she never deserved to live under. The decision was made. There was no turning back now. Deacon Appreciation Sunday arrived faster than I expected. I barely slept the night before, lying awake, replaying the coming moment in my mind. I knew what I was about to do would change everything. I knew people would stare at me with shock and judgment. I knew some would think I was cruel for exposing my father in public, but I also knew that my mother had lived under a lie for almost 4 decades. I knew the truth deserved daylight, and I knew that if I backed out now, I would never forgive myself. When I walked into the church that morning, the building was already full. Every pew was packed with families dressed in their Sunday best. The choir was warming up. The ushers were greeting people at the door. The room buzzed with excitement. My father walked around smiling confidently, shaking hands, thanking members for coming. People hugged him and called him a man of integrity. They told him he had changed their lives. They told him his marriage to my mother was an example of God's faithfulness. My mother stood beside him, glowing with pride. She looked beautiful in a soft blue dress she saved for special events. I watched her smile at him with love in her eyes, and it made my chest tighten with guilt because she had no idea what was coming. I sat through the first part of the service in silence. My hands rested on the folder in my lap, and my heartbeat felt loud in my ears. The pastor delivered a long introduction about my father's leadership, describing him as a man who lived by strong moral principles. He talked about my parents' unbreakable bond. He even joked that my father had only ever loved one girl since high school, and people laughed and cheered. My father smiled proudly and placed his arm around my mother's shoulders. She beamed, unaware of the truth that was sitting only a few feet away from her. When the pastor stepped aside and said, "If anyone would like to share words of appreciation, the floor is open," I felt my chance rise in front of me. My legs felt heavy, but I forced myself to stand. It felt like every movement echoed in the room. A few people smiled at me as I walked to the front, assuming I was going to say something sweet about my father. My father's expression tightened immediately. His jaw clenched. His eyes narrowed. He knew. I reached the pulpit and rested my hands on the wooden edges. I looked at my mother first. She gave me a warm smile, not knowing that her world was about to change. Then I looked at my father. He shook his head subtly, as if trying to warn me. That look did not stop me. It only confirmed that what I was doing was right. I took a steady breath and said, "Today, my father told everyone that my mother has been his only sweetheart since high school. I know that many of you believe that. I believed it too. But last week, I found something in his old briefcase that I think everyone in this room deserves to know." Gasps spread through the room instantly. I reached into my folder and lifted the stack of letters. The red ribbon was still tied around them. My father stepped forward slightly and said, "Riley, sit down right now." His voice carried through the room like a command. A hush fell. People turned to look at him with confusion. I kept my voice calm. "Dad, please let me finish." He tried again, louder. "This is not the time or place." I answered, "It is exactly the time and place." I opened the first letter. My hands were shaking, but my voice was clear. I began reading a line he had written in 1986. "I cannot stop thinking about you. Every time you smile at me in the office, I feel like I am waking up again." A ripple of shock moved through the congregation. Some people shifted uncomfortably. Others stared at my father with disbelief. I read another line from a different letter. I know we cannot be open about our relationship, but you are the one who makes me feel alive." My mother's face went pale. She looked at my father with confusion and pain, and he stared straight ahead, trying to appear calm, but his eyes were full of panic. I opened another letter and read, "I promise I will find a way to tell Jenna. I want a future with you. Please do not give up on me." Someone in the front row whispered, "Oh my God." My father stepped forward quickly and said, "Riley, stop this. You are humiliating your mother." His voice sounded desperate, almost pleading, but I did not stop. I lifted the final page, the birth announcement, the cream paper with the baby's name written neatly across the top. "This," I said, holding it up so everyone could see, "is the announcement of my father's other daughter, born in 1987. People gasped loudly. Some covered their mouths. A few looked down as if unsure what to do. The sanctuary, filled with shock and silence. I continued, "Her name is Lillian. She grew up without a father because he chose his reputation over her. Mom, he signed this birth certificate. He knew. He lied to both of us every day." My mother stared at the paper as if trying to process the words. Tears filled her eyes. She didn't speak. Her hands dropped slowly to her lap as if her strength left her all at once. My father finally raised his voice. "I made mistakes, but that was years ago. It meant nothing." I looked at him and said, "It meant everything to the people you hurt." The pastor looked stunned, unable to speak. The congregation remained frozen. Some were angry at my father. Some were overwhelmed. Some looked at me with sympathy, but no one defended him. The truth had filled the room, and there was no way to push it back into the dark. I ended by saying, "Mom deserved the truth, and so did I, and so did the child you hid." Then I stepped away from the pulpit. The room stayed silent as my mother slowly stood and walked out. Everyone watched her leave with heartbreak written across their faces. I followed her out, leaving my father alone in the front of the church, standing in the ruins of the life he had tried to protect with lies. The truth had finally come out, and nothing would ever be the same again. When my mother and I walked out of the church that day, neither of us spoke at first. The sunlight felt too bright, the parking lot too quiet, and the air too heavy. My mother moved slowly, almost as if each step needed more strength than she had left. I unlocked the car, and she sat down gently, resting her hands on her lap. I waited for her to speak, but she stared straight ahead, silent and pale. I could feel her heart breaking even though she didn't make a sound. After everything she had built her life around, this was the moment it all collapsed. We sat there for several minutes. The church doors opened behind us, and a few people came out whispering, but no one approached us. Everyone seemed to understand that my mother needed space. I kept my eyes on her, watching her steady her breath. When she finally turned her head toward me, her eyes were wet but calm. She took a deep breath and said, "Thank you for not letting me live in the dark." Her voice was soft, but there was a strength in it I didn't expect. I felt my chest loosen, and tears filled my own eyes. I had been terrified she would hate me for exposing the truth publicly, but hearing those words felt like a hand pulling me out of a deep fog. My mother leaned back in the seat and closed her eyes. "I always believed your father wasn't perfect, but I never imagined all of this," she said. "You didn't break our family. He did." I nodded and reached for her hand. For the first time that day, I felt grounded. I wasn't sure what came next, but I knew she didn't blame me, and that meant everything. We drove home quietly. Inside the house, my mother went straight to her room and sat on the edge of the bed. I sat beside her. The room felt different now, like every piece of furniture held memories built on a lie. My father had spent years creating a life full of secrets, but my mother was the one who lived with the consequences. A few hours later, my father came home. The front door slammed harder than usual. He walked straight to the bedroom and stood in the doorway, his face a mix of frustration, fear, and denial. He said, "Jenna, you cannot believe everything she said up there. Those letters were from a long time ago. They don't reflect the man I am now." He spoke like a man trying to hold on to something slipping through his fingers. My mother looked up at him with a tired expression. "You wrote them. You lived them. You signed the birth certificate. You hid an entire child from me," she said. Her voice didn't shake. She was not yelling. She wasn't begging. She was simply stating the truth. My father opened his mouth but closed it again. There was nothing he could say to erase decades of deceit. He tried again. I did what I thought was best at the time. My mother shook her head. You did what was best for you. He shifted his attention toward me. You should have come to me privately. Families handle things privately. I looked him in the eyes and said, you lost the right to privacy the moment you let the whole church worship a version of you that never existed. For a moment, no one spoke. The house felt cold and unfamiliar. My father looked like he wanted to argue, but he couldn't find the words. Instead, he walked out of the room without saying anything else. The door clicked shut behind him. That sound marked the beginning of a new chapter for all of us. Over the next few days, the church community reacted in different ways. Some members reached out to my mother with kind messages, telling her they were praying for her strength. Others didn't know what to say. Some avoided us entirely. A few women told my mother privately that they had always sensed something off about my father's behavior, but didn't know what it was. My mother listened to all of them politely, but she mostly stayed quiet, reflecting on her own life and the years she spent trusting a man who had never been honest with her. My father left several voicemails during those days. He apologized, defended himself, minimized the affair, then apologized again. His messages shifted between regret and anger. I didn't respond to any of them. I had spent too many years trying to understand him, trying to earn something he never intended to give. I finally realized the truth. Some people hold power by keeping others in the dark, and he had done that to us for decades. As my mother and I started to rebuild our routines, I kept thinking about the name on the birth announcement, Lillian Doyle. I needed to know who she was, not because I wanted to hurt my father or dig into his past, but because she deserved to know she wasn't forgotten. And I needed to know if she had spent her whole life wondering about the man who walked away from her before she was old enough to speak. I found a phone number connected to the address listed in one of the old documents. My hands shook when I dialed it. When a woman answered, her voice was cautious but warm. I said, "Hi, I'm sorry if this is unexpected. My name is Riley. I believe we share a connection through someone named Paul Hartman." There was a long pause, and I could hear her breath catch. She finally responded, "I always wondered if he had another family." Hearing her say that made something inside me break and heal at the same time. We talked for almost 30 minutes. She told me she grew up with questions but not many answers. Her mother never badmouthed my father. She simply told her that he had his own life and could not be part of hers. Lillian admitted she had always wondered if she had siblings. When I told her I was her sister, she cried. I cried too. It felt like a small light breaking through years of darkness. That conversation gave me a strange sense of peace. I did not know what kind of relationship we would build, but I knew I wanted to know her. I knew I wanted her to know that she mattered, even if our father chose to hide her existence. As days turned into weeks, my mother grew stronger. She started attending church again, not because she wanted to pretend everything was fine, but because she refused to let my father's choices take away her faith. She told me, "My heart is hurt, but it's still beating. I will not let his lies ruin the rest of my life." I learned something too. Families are not defined by the lies that were told, but by the truth people are willing to face. My father's choices shaped our past, but they did not have to dictate our future. My mother and I chose honesty. We chose healing. We chose to move towards something healthier. Thank you for listening to this story. If it connected with you, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. I appreciate every single one of you.